Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Overcoming the Podcast. I am your host, Taylor, and today we are doing another episode of the ADHD miniseries, and I am joined from Kristen from Weirdly Wired Women, and I'm going to have her step on and introduce herself and why she's here, and we'll get started.
Hi, Taylor. Thanks for having me. I'm Kristen Stelzer, and I founded Weirdly Wired Women to help women who have never felt like they fit the mold in the corporate world find a place that they fit. And while I have some neurodivergence, it's not specifically for neurodivergent women. I find that women are under so much pressure at work that whether you've got diagnosed neurodivergence or not, you're dealing with all kinds of extra brain stuff. And so that's my aim is to help women who have felt like they never fit in figure out how they can fit in. And oftentimes that means by starting their own business.
Absolutely. And yeah, starting your own business. Been there. Absolutely. So I'm excited to get in this conversation because you do work a lot with entrepreneurs, and especially female entrepreneurs. And there's quite a few of us in this page. So I'm excited to
Yes,
dive in a little bit deeper. So do you want to share a little bit about what got you started, why you even wanted to create this?
sure. So uh, what was not surprising after I realized I had ADHD, but I was diagnosed very late. So I was diagnosed last year. I was 47, I think, 48. Um, And so throughout my career, I went to school for engineering. I was the very stereotypical good student, driven by anxiety, but I didn't realize it. Like nobody ever would have
Yeah.
thought I had ADHD.
Yep.
And then I went to college. I did all of the things, and I got an engineering degree, and I started working in engineering, and that was fine for me. Like it suited my like puzzle solving and wanting to 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 solve problems, and there was that learning, like that cool aspect to it. But then I found that I would get bored so easily. Like after a couple years where I had gained expertise, I was like, yeah, like what's next? Like I couldn't imagine myself being one of those people who had been in the same job or in the same niche for like 20 years. So
Yeah.
um, fortunately, because I was in land development, there was always like someplace else to go. So I went into various different things looking for where I fit. And I was like, believed that there was going to be this magical, like, I've found the place because, I grew up in the era of, you got a job and you stayed there for 40 years.
Yes.
And I never got that. Um, so I progressed and I progressed, but every time I would get bored within a couple of years, and eventually, and ironically, I made the choice to move to a company because it was the safe choice, and the company I
Mm.
had been at was having some layoffs, and then I got laid off
Oh,
um,
no.
from that company, and it was a I had been toying with the idea of starting my own business for a while, and that was just kind of the if I don't do it now, I'm not going to do it at all. And I
Yeah.
started because of my background, I started tech writing and working
Mm.
in the technology field. But my goal was always to help um, women entrepreneurs who needed to be getting their voices out and sharing their experiences and becoming like not influencers, but like experts in their field, but didn't have time to do the writing or didn't like to write. My goal was to help them, but every time I got to the point where I was going to pivot to that, I was resisting. And so I hired my amazing coach, Angie Coley, and she and I were talking about some things. And it just so happened that at that time, I had not only just gotten diagnosed, but I was running into so many women who were sort of at the same kind of crossroads in their careers. Like, I'm so tired of all of this stuff that's going on. And
Yeah.
like this, corporate life is not made for people who have kids or aging parents or any caregiving responsibilities or anything besides you know a housewife at home who can take care of everything for you.
Hmm.
So as we were talking about that and the experiences these women were having and how I was helping them, she's like, you realize you light up every time you talk about that? And I was like, huh.
Love
So
that.
so that's kind of how the idea was born, that that's really what I wanted to do. And then I've further honed my focus mostly on women who have some neurodiversity or some other kind of challenge that just makes it hard to fit in. Because there are lots
Yeah.
of women who can navigate the corporate world, but there are a lot of us who can't. It's just so hard.
I wholeheartedly agree. First of all, thank you for sharing your story. I think that's so inspirational and also for the work that you do because I agree that there's just women in general, like systems are built. We live in a patriarchal society. We know
Right.
that, right? Like, especially corporate systems. Corporate systems are built for men. And like you said, they're not accommodating. And especially when you add in that neurodivergent component, you realize that these systems are set for very neurotypical people, right?
Right.
It's like conform or you're the odd one out, or you're
Right.
getting negatives on your performance reviews, or you can't keep up, or what's wrong with you. And so we just internalize this what's wrong with me thing, right? And, I have a very similar story in that March 2020. So when I first got into the field of occupational therapy, I started at this pediatric occupational therapy clinic and, working with kids, which I was very familiar with and loved and super comfortable with. But even so, it was my first job in the middle of, like just going to school, getting my doctorate, had a little bit of clinical experience for 3 months, but it was the first time being on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started at this clinic, and the leader of the entire clinic said she would mentor me, which was wonderful. But what happened is between the anxiety things that come up with like cases that were not known or medical things that I didn't know and not wanting to make a mistake or, just like things that I hadn't seen before, I had more questions than I guess she was comfortable with later down the line. And basically it was like, you should know this by now. You should be fine by now. But like complex, rare medical cases, she's like, you should be able to problem solve this without me. I'm too overwhelmed. I can't keep up. So I don't know what to tell you, but maybe you shouldn't be in this field,
Oh
essentially.
my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I was like 4 months into my career at this point, and she was upset that I was asking questions about complex medical cases and that I
Mm-hmm.
had too much anxiety or whatever it was. And so basically, I was doing great with my kiddos. Like I was really strong with the relationship component and like helping them feel safe. And like kids who had anxiety or anything else, like I really was able to connect with them and like help them get into their bodies and feel more comfortable and that kind of thing. And also with parents as well. And then I started recognizing that like that's a huge component of things. Well, long story short, March 2020, I got laid off. And it wasn't personal, but I
Right.
just happened to be the one who made a complaint and just was the only like one of a couple that got laid off as soon as they could. So it was actually a blessing in disguise for me because I started this page and just being able to share trauma education and sell like soothing strategies for anxiety when the world was chaotic. But then I tried to go back part time, probably after about a year, somewhere in there, once there was finally jobs open again. And I found myself in this like pattern of hyper focus and burnout. And, this company was a great company. They were very diverse in what they served. They were going into homes and also going into schools and going into clinic as well. And so I was like, wow, this gives me like you, I get bored really easily. And I chose occupational therapy because if you go into a different area, it's like a new
Right.
job, but you're still certified. So, there's just so many things that you can do. And so I was excited with like having the ability to do all the settings, but then I also got really overwhelmed. And especially in pandemic, things were changing all the time. I couldn't just, like improv everything. I was great with the kiddos themselves and, like in person. But then there was so much planning and paperwork and all of these things and switching settings and then worried about safety and all of these things that I had to manage that even part-time, I was feeling overwhelmed because I wanted to keep my business going and there was just so much happening. And I just like realized I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I keep up with this paperwork? Like if I were to have a longer evaluation, which is like maybe like a 9 to 10 page document, but there's a lot of templates and you've done it before. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like a routine thing, but it just takes like 2 or 3 hours to sit down and do. If I knew that was going to happen, then it would just sit on my plate and it would just stress me out more and more. And I wouldn't be able to start it. Even though I wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do it. And so I was just like, what is happening? And so then the more and more of those that I would get that would be on my plate, I would get more and more overwhelmed and just kind of went into this like shutdown. And I realized that it was like later afterwards, I got diagnosed with ADHD and I'm like, wow, this makes sense. But like there were so many demands coming at me at once that, once upon a time I was a great multitasker.
Right.
But I was in survival mode and anxiety like you, right? And so now that I've been like healing my nervous system and kind of back into my body and not using those like push through, overextend myself, my brain was having a hard time keeping up. And so that's just kind of where I ended up where I was as well. So, and then I was like, well, I'm going to start my own business. And then you find out a whole other plethora of things,
Yes.
right? It's like my favorite thing is like, I forget who said it. It was like someone who, when I was getting ready to start the business, and they were just like, well, if you want to know all of your flaws and see everything that you need to work on right in your face, become an entrepreneur and get ready for it. And I was like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I did. I came out with an ADHD diagnosis and all of these triggers that I saw, and then it's also been like a healing journey. But I'm very grateful that we're having this conversation, because talking to a lot of, especially neurodivergent women, the workforce is not set up for us. And accommodations aren't even like, they exist, but I feel like they're not always met with kindness or actual understanding, like sometimes on the surface. But if you need to do something more than once, then there can like be like resentment building in the corporate world, especially. And, it could just be really hard to manage.
Right. No, absolutely. And I know you can get accommodations for neurodiversity. Now, I didn't ever try to get any of those because I didn't know at the time. But
Yeah.
I imagine that those like would have gone over even worse than the, hey, I'm going to be a little late every day because I dropped my son off at school,
Yeah.
like, and yeah. One of the things that you said though that I wanted to touch back on, just because I'm curious how your experience was when you said you got laid off, because,
Yeah.
I mean, both of us, I think, reflecting back, think it was, like you said, a blessing in disguise. But in that
Yeah.
moment, I mean, it feels like your world is ending. Like
Yep.
I did not realize how tightly my identity was tied into my career, because I was like, oh, it's just work. I work because I, want to eat. It's not part of like my identity. And then the next day, in fact, like the day that I got laid off it sucked. But like the next day was worse, because I woke up and I'm like, I have never had nowhere to go
Yeah.
to work when I've wanted to. Like I've had breaks in employment for moves or whatever, but there was a purpose and I had engineered that purpose. But this was like out of my control. And it like that hit me hard as well. And then I think on top of that, probably now that I know what it is, like rejection sensitivity or
Mm-hmm.
rejection. Oh gosh, I can never
No, you're
remember
right.
the,
I know.
yeah.
I recorded a podcast where I was introducing RSD, and I was like, relation sensitive dysphoria. No, I just call it
Okay,
RSD, but it's
good.
rejection sensitive dysphoria. That is the
Yes.
correct term.
And so I mean, I felt
Yeah.
like I was just never, like I had no value and nobody was ever going to want to hire me again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know whether I was taking that energy into job interviews with me, because, I immediately started to find another job because that's what you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Um, but then at some point during that, I was like, I just don't want to do this. Like this isn't what I want to do. I don't want to go back into another one of these jobs. I don't want my livelihood to be in the hands of someone who, and in my case, was my boss's boss, just didn't like me, decided that I didn't have the personality to do my job. I'd been
Yeah.
doing that job for like 20 years, very successfully at other companies, but he just
Yeah.
decided because I didn't act the way that he thought that I should act, that 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 I couldn't do the job. And so I was let
Yeah.
go. And then
Same
just
with
like
me. Yep.
that that like um kind of I had I'd gone through the early or the mid 2000 recession, and so there were a lot of layoffs then, and I managed to escape them all,
Yeah.
luckily. So I guess I kind of had this belief that, I don't know, somehow I was like, I don't know, would always make it through, like without having this like layoff experience. And so it just, I was so stunned and so unprepared. And so
Mm-hmm.
before then, I believed in this, like, oh, you have a job, you have job security. And then I realized you do not.
No.
Like,
And I think security is a myth. I mean,
mhm,
especially when the world can change.
right,
We've lived
right.
through it. We've seen how overnight the entire world can shift, right? And I think that, I'm really glad you brought that out about how you felt like you just kind of like lost a sense of self in a way,
Hmm.
like a
Right.
piece of your identity. You know what I mean? And I get that too. And it's funny that you say like, did you bring that into other jobs? I did.
Yeah.
So, it's like I internalized, first of all, it's internalizing what is wrong with me that I can't do
Right.
this. Because even though I'm like, I know what I'm asking for isn't too much. And it's not, like someone else will just be like, oh, here, this is a great resource on this medical, whatever. Or, like, hey, this is, but my boss was already overwhelmed. And so instead of regulating herself, she just like went, no, you're too much. Right. And so
Mhm.
because my entire life I've been told I was too much, undiagnosed neurodivergent, trauma history. I know, like I have been told my entire life that I am too much. And so I used to just chameleon and
Mhm.
dumb myself down and whatever to fit in these things. But I think that like at a certain point, you're like, I'm not doing this anymore. And then it's scary too, because like you were like, they just didn't like my personality, so they let me go. That's
Right.
essentially what happened to me. I mean, again, to say it's nothing personal, it's just because you had a doctorate and you were one of the newer hires. I recognize, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I can recognize the pattern. I understand you didn't like me and it was a way out to help you save some money in a maybe unstable time. Like I get it. And so, I had this thing with authority, especially after that. Like I already had troubles with authority in the past because of, past things or jobs or, in grad school, even like, because I really was starting to recognize that I was different in grad school and like needed different things or whatever. I wasn't always fitting the professional
Mhm.
mold that they wanted me to. And so, I would run into little things with professors or whatever, and nothing like serious, but enough to like, you need to act different. You need to be a
Right.
different personality, basically. And it was never really with clients, but it was just like, even at the school, like you need to start being like a professional because you're already being judged. And I was like, ooh. So, I already had things with like, what am I doing wrong? Is my personality too much? And then when I got into this new job, which actually I knew these owners from way back in like 2012. I worked alongside them when I worked in special education. I was just a special ed assistant. And at first they just had a speech therapy company. And they were considering adding occupational therapy there and were going to like poach me and hire me eventually. But like start me off as like a special education assistant potentially with their company. So like I knew of them and they knew me and they liked how I worked back then. So it's not like it was just like someone brand new I had to like please. But like I reconnected with them and I got feedback in my first review that like if I felt like I did something wrong, like I was behind on paperwork or I misspoke or something, that the emails that I would send or, I would like overcorrect to the point where I was over explaining. And they're like, you think that every time you make a mistake, you're going to be fired. That was my number one thing in my performance review. And I was like, it's like, you're human. You're allowed to make mistakes. But I had such anxiety because the moment that I spoke up for my needs in the last one, where things were different or things were harder, they were like, yeah, no, I can't support
Right.
you. So that carried on into the other jobs. And I think that that did lead to burnout as well, because I was also adding on this, like, I have to be perfect. This is a really big changing world. And this is really hard for my brain, but I can't let anyone know I'm struggling because I'm going to get fired, and like all of these things. And so I do think that adds into it. And on top of that, you do internalize like, oh, something is wrong with me.
Right.
And, like maybe I don't deserve this. And so then are you really showing up to the best of your ability at that point if you're just trying to like dim yourself or make yourself fit in or don't have confidence in yourself? Probably not.
No. And then the other thing is like just I've so many companies just interview terribly and they have that like rote formula and you're like and I've long thought that was stupid. And when I interviewed people when I was in a position of hiring, I just didn't do that. And so
Yeah.
I would go to these interviews and it would just be like, oh, like why are you giving me this ridiculous scenario? Like, can we just not talk about the problems that you're having and what I can do? And like, so yeah, just the whole thing. Like the more and more I was doing that, and I was still toying with the idea of starting my own business, but
Mm-hmm.
after a couple interviews and like just the disinterest in going to any of them, like I was like, yeah, this I gotta give this a shot or I'll never do it.
Yeah.
Um, but but yeah, I mean, it takes yeah, there's just so many things about working that are terrible. Like especially the interviews where you feel like you have not, you like they put you in a position of, you know, you're kind of like groveling for the job. Like they have more to offer than you do. And I'm like, no, I'm actually quite skilled. But
Mm-hmm.
now you want me to play this like, oh yes, I would love to work for this company and I think it's amazing. And, you know, so they don't take kindly to asking questions about their culture and like, you know, how would you treat, you know, when I have to leave because my son has an emergency at school.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, I think some benefit for me came with a little bit of age and definitely enough savings that I could start my own business. I know that I'm very fortunate in that way, but I've been thinking a lot about ways that other people can start to get out because it's so soul sucking, and
It
it
is.
doesn't have to be that way. And I've found that I feel more secure now in my job, even though it's me and I'm a small business owner, because I
Yeah.
have the ability to change. Like you said, when the world changes, I can make a decision to change. I can
Yeah.
change. I can see some signs and be like, "Oh, I don't think this is going so well," and I can pivot. Then I have so much more control over outcomes than I used to. Now I can't control everything, of course, but like
Yeah.
it's so much more empowering to be like, okay, this client isn't working out. I'm not going to work with someone like that anymore. Um, or wow, that was a mistake. Or wow, I love this kind of work and this is what I want to pursue.
Yep.
So, yeah, I know that was just like a bunch of random direct
No,
that I went.
honestly, that's the beauty of all of the random is it connects beautifully
Yes.
because it's like, yeah, it's like there's a bunch of things where it seems random, but you're right. There is more control. And I would also say there's more flexibility, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we mentioned at the beginning is like, yes, environmental factors like I need to pick up my child, but also what if you're just having an off day where you can't perform in the same way that you normally do? Like
Right.
I know that I ran into that, especially in the pandemic that was extra triggering for me and my nervous system because I am a trauma survivor. And so when, I was okay to a point, but then when we're talking about safety of children, my nervous system was just like so consumed of this is my responsibility. I have to be the one, like I am the helper here. I'm on the front lines with this. I am the ones going into these. Like there was a child that I was working with that they were basically like, it's either that they potentially stay this the rest of their life or they see therapy and there's a risk of if they get sick they die but they have to be to a certain level for like strength and whatever it is in order to get this life-changing surgery, so we're going to risk it, so please be careful with what you do. And I'm like, okay, I mean I was, but you know what I mean, so it's just like all of this already anxiety built up, so then
Hmm.
you're having to function even if it, pandemic or not, there's always like circumstances going on in our life. And if you're someone who struggles with self regulation or, you have other mental health challenges or, even today, let's just be honest. I came up here to you and I was like, I am having a hard brain day. It is
Hmm.
not my brain day, right? But here's the thing is like us as entrepreneurs can share that. But if I went to a corporate boss and it's like, I'm having a bad brain day, buddy, like
Right.
they'd be like, so
Yeah.
why do I care? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I guess it comes down a lot to executive functioning, I think, just being able to access those higher level brain tasks when there's so much shifting around you or you have other needs or, it's just like, and especially when we're talking about neurodivergent population, um, you know, really being able to manage that, but also recognizing like, how can I support myself? So if you are working with women who are having like maybe a harder time or they have fluctuating, nervous system or having a hard time concentrating or paying attention one day or whatever it is, what kind of things, first of all, would you work with them on or supports or like what have you seen?
Oh gosh, I mean everybody presents so differently, and really more what I do is kind of help people figure out where their sweet spot is more so
Yeah.
than specific ADHD
Yeah.
stuff. But I think the first thing I'll say is that when you're doing something that you enjoy, those bad brain days, I mean they come, but they seem um, they're less difficult. And then when you are able to choose who you work with,
Mm-hmm.
um, you can choose people who are accommodating to that. Like I
Yep.
used to always love when I had female clients, who would come to me for writing because if I had something happen, I could always call them and just be like, you know what, the school called, I had to go pick up my son because my son has some sensory processing issues and then he's also got ADHD. So there were lots of trips to the school before we figured all that out.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh no, it's totally okay. We can figure this out. I mean, it was just so much more accommodating. Or I found people who did not grow up in the U.S. Like, because I
Mm.
have, so it's not just that it's women, but also people in a culture where they like take vacations and your life is not your,
Yep.
you don't have to be on all the time and stuff
Yep.
happens. So, but those and now with neurodivergent women, I really like working with them because we all have those days where we're like, I'm sorry, I'm running late. And it's not um, we know that nobody's doing it on purpose, and so that allows all of us to give each other grace, and that in
Yeah.
itself makes a huge difference. Um, and I think that's probably one of the keys is giving yourself grace. Now, it's very easy
Hmm.
to give someone else grace. It's very hard to give it to yourself.
Truly.
And I struggle with that too. Like I am harder on myself than I would be on anybody else in the world. Um, but I think that helps so much with your executive function when you're like, okay, I'm a human. I'm also a human with ADHD, and I'm going to struggle with this sometimes, and that's okay. And
Yep.
and when we let that happen, rather than trying to fight it,
Hmm.
it's like it's more exhausting to fight it, and you get more drained and less likely to be able to do the thing that you need to do. Whereas if you're like, okay, I need I need something else right now to help
Yep.
me reset.
Yep.
And giving that to yourself and recognizing it. And I'm just as guilty of this as anybody where I believe that I can, you know, yeah, I'm in control of you, brain, and I'm gonna think my way through this, and
Oh
you
yeah.
can't. And eventually I realized that, and
Yeah.
I'm working on getting to that realization part a little faster.
Yeah.
um, but
Yep.
but yeah, and then for some, it's kind of just figuring out what it is that works for you. What is it that motivates you?
Hmm.
And I'm always trying random new things because
Yeah.
again, they work for a little while, and then I'm like, yeah, that's not working anymore.
Yep. Truly. Honestly, podcasting is like my favorite thing. And that's why like even on like bad brain days or whatever, I'm like, oh, I can turn it on for podcasting. It's like really easy and natural and enjoyable. But like, if I have to sit down right now and like type up paperwork, that would be really challenging. Right.
Yeah,
And so I think it is, yeah, it's just knowing yourself and also like you said, like the communication and accommodation and once you create these spaces and just environments and social supports, and even
right.
if you're still in this corporate job where maybe they're not going to be accommodating, if you have your humans that you can talk to or a
Mhm.
mentor or outside of things to just be like, hey, I'm having a hard time. Sometimes even just being met with compassion and
Right.
empathy and understanding and saying, reminding you're allowed to be human goes a long way,
Well,
and I can say for myself too that like coming on here when I was like, hey, I feel comfortable that enough that I can tell you it's a bad brain day today. And whereas if I was going into like a corporate meeting, I would be like so much anxiety that I wouldn't even be able to communicate something like that. And then I would just feel like I'd be expecting to do more, and then I would shut down more, and it would be harder because then you're trying to force yourself to perform in a way where it's not possible, and also internalizing judgment and worry about judgment from others, and so the anxiety just makes it harder too.
yeah, I did find that I mean, this helped as when I was doing writing projects for people. I mean, I very usually I'm deadline driven anyway, and it's very rare that I would miss a deadline, but sometimes it happened,
Mhm.
and I would just. I mean, I didn't want to get into the whole, oh, well, I have ADHD and I'm having, but I would just say, look, I am having a hard time finishing this to the quality that I want to. And I can get it done to you today if it's really important. But if I could have another 3 days, I think we'd all be much happier with the product because I'll still get them what they want. I know it's not going to be my best. And so I think that's a tool that, or a phrase that you can use in a lot of places. I mean, obviously, if you work in one of those really like old school places where there's never going to show you any compassion, I mean, just I, I'm sorry. I feel bad because I know,
Yeah.
but like if you have any sort of realistic human that you work for, and you can be like, hey, I know we wanted this done, and I can get it done today if we really need to, but it's not going to be my best work because I'm just um, I'm thinking about something and it's just not coming together for me the way I want it to. And I think it would be better if I could wait. And then maybe there's some other lower priority tasks or like not as stressful tasks that you could work on instead, because I mean, there's always going to be stuff to do. But if you have anybody like it's very rare. I mean, in certain things, the deadline is real and necessary, but in a lot of them, there is a flexible. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a deadline because someone decided it was a deadline.
Hmm.
And so if you can just be like, hey, I know I can do better than what I'm doing right now, but I need a little break from it to let my mind, like, I don't know, let the back of my mind
Yeah.
suss out this problem.
Yeah.
And uh, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but if I had someone who said that to me, I'd be like, oh, absolutely. Like, yeah, this
Hmm.
deadline is, yeah, we have some flexibility here. I mean, fortunately, I don't work in a position in a like I get to decide the deadlines. So
Yep.
but nothing like nobody's going to die if this goes out a day later than I wanted it to, or even 2 days. It's okay. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And, I even, I think to myself sometimes, because I have deadlines that I set for myself in my business, and there are times where I can't meet them or something comes up or whatever. Right. And, I love that when you're working with others, that you can share that component of like, this can get done. It's not going to be to the standard that you want, but it can get done if you just need it done. And
right,
also, if you would rather have quality over the fact that it's just a check mark, this would
right.
be the option. And I think that's really good because it's saying, like, I'm obviously respecting what you decide you need.
Hmm.
Here's my capacity and what I can provide right now, and then kind of move on from there. And I think too, like for me as a solo entrepreneur, like I hold myself to these very high standards of we're doing this, then
Of
this,
course.
then
Yes.
this, then this, then this, right? This is going to be on this date, and people are relying on me for here. But like, is anyone going to get upset if like the podcast doesn't go out on Monday and it goes out on Tuesday? I really don't think so, right? Or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
So it's interesting in that because I think our world kind of is driven by deadlines and
Right,
driven by this structure, right? And I think that we get into this zone of we have to fit this structure, we have to fit this mold. And sometimes just stepping outside and like, pulling back and saying, okay, if I'm forced to be in this structure, is this going to be the best? Do I want this to be done, or do I want this to be done to the best of its ability? Right.
right.
And then really looking at that and going, what is that? Whether that's for something we're doing in our lives or with corporate or whatever, I think that's a really great thing.
Yeah, well, and I think that, I mean, the trouble is for some corporations, especially public corporations, they are required to follow certain rules and they're beholden to their investors. And so yeah, they really don't have a lot of flexibility with certain deadlines.
Yeah.
And 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 I understand that. But I can choose to work with companies that are like that, or I can choose to work with non-public companies or individuals and you know, kind of set up my clients based on I what I know each of them is going to be capable to bend on and how human they're going to be because again I want to work with like I think I put it in one of my products like I don't work with asshats like that's like I
Truly.
don't I like that's and that makes such a huge difference that I
It does.
genuinely like every single person I work with
Mhm.
because why why would I make myself suffer? Um,
Yep.
and I choose to work with people who are compassionate and understand that, life happens. And um, fairly recently, I had someone I work with, one of my consultants, had a horrible, unexpected death of a friend. And I don't know why he answered the phone when I called, but he was clearly distraught and he explained what happened. And I was like, there is absolutely nothing that we are working on
Mm-mm.
that needs like go take care of yourself and what you need and I'm not going to call you for a little while
Yeah.
but I am thinking about you. Maybe I'll call to check in, but do not feel like you need to answer the phone because like honestly there is nothing that I am doing like
Mm-mm.
and there's very little that I can think of that would be important enough to be like to put pressure on someone who is already like in the depths of like absolute grief. Like what are you going to gain by that? Nobody's going to win.
No.
um so
No, and I think that that's important too, is like, yeah, the flexibility and, when it comes to supporting others and, I'm definitely like that as much as I can be as a business owner as well. And like now that I have a team, it's more like building in deadlines that are earlier and, like building, and this is my first time doing this too. So like working in supports and that kind of thing
mhm,
and like trying to look in and be like, okay, what would I want? What would I need? But I think that that's important. And even if we take that philosophy into our personal lives or we take that into our to-do lists around the house or whatever it may be, right? Is like the more overwhelmed we feel, the harder it is to do the things.
right.
And, if there's more of like a trauma response at a certain day or there's like grief stuff going on or whatever it is, like in my very first online course, like I had been prepping for this forever. I have had this vision since the beginning. It was like 2 years into my business. I'm finally putting this baby up. Right in the middle of this, I have a huge trigger, like showing up live for my clients. And I can't explain it because I literally was in the middle of like a police thing and
Mhm.
supporting with an investigation that was really intense. And like, obviously, one, I legally wasn't allowed to say anything, but two, it's like, this is happening right in the middle of this. So I have to figure out my capacity and what I need to do to be able to show up. And I still had to do some of the things, but I
Hmm.
did have to change some of my expectations on myself because this was big. And,
Right.
I also was worried for my life at that point as well. So, like, in the grand scheme of things, could some clients potentially be really upset? Yes. What could I possibly be giving some refunds? Yeah. But if I overextend myself too much to the point where I can't manage myself, who is that going to hurt more? Probably
Right.
everyone,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
So I had to shift things and, like meetings were a little bit less than I wanted them to be. And I already had a lot of like content recorded, but as far as like live things, I cut back a little bit more than I wanted to and said, here are some resources instead.
Hmm.
But then like it took a while to get out of that shame component of like, I couldn't do. And I was judging myself so harshly. It was like, oh, man, I should have done better. And looking back, it's like, no, actually, that was really hard.
Yeah.
No one would, if anyone knew what was going on, no one would expect you to be able to do it that way, right?
Right. And
Um, so yeah, I get that.
yeah, and I think what you touched on made me think that one of the things that I think is also incredibly important, you are going to start out as an entrepreneur or you're just trying to make it work at work and you're overwhelmed as a woman or a neurodivergent or both,
Hmm.
um, is to find a community that gets it because
Yeah.
it can be really, really lonely and really isolating, especially if you feel like you're the only one who's experiencing it. Now, you might be the only one experiencing it at your company. You might not be able to find a community there,
Yeah.
and maybe you don't want to. Maybe you need that separation, and that's probably a good thing. But there are so many spaces now where you can find that support and community, and just like the people who get it when you're like, oh my God, I like totally blew this meeting today, and I'm never going to have any more clients again. And like you have the people who can like talk you down and like, oh no, I think that first of
Yep.
all, it probably wasn't as bad as you think in your head. And
Yep.
the people who really believe in you are going to follow along. And yeah, maybe you give some refunds, but that's not the worst thing in the world. And just those kinds of um,
Yeah.
or even just like, okay, well, I see you're struggling with this at work, have you tried this approach with your boss? Or, I had something similar happen and I tried this and maybe that'll help you. Just having making sure that you don't feel alone is so important because you're not. It just feels that way, and everything is harder when you feel like you have to do it by yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like the social support is super, super helpful. And even if you can't communicate it to your boss, even if you can't communicate it to the clients or whatever, like for whatever circumstance, right? I think that it is good to have those other supports in place. And that brings me to like the idea of like, if this is something that's a regular for you, if you're a complex trauma survivor and you get triggered, or if, like there are harder anniversaries, or if there were just like seasons that are trickier, or, like certain triggers or whatever, that you have ADHD and so you fluctuate in your ability to maintain attention or perform or whatever it may be, to have like proactive support set up and
Hmm.
systems as much as you can preparing for that. It
Right,
is inevitable, right?
right.
We know. And anything, even if you have like a chronic illness, even if like sometimes, like autoimmune stuff, there are flare ups, it doesn't matter what it is. I find that like having a proactive system in place really helps. And for me as an entrepreneur, after I worked past the shame of that, it was actually a really good lesson because I realized that me showing up live is not the best way for me to run my business because things in my life do fluctuate enough to where I can't show up to how I want to all of the time.
Right,
And I
exactly.
am my best when I am my best, and my content is solid when I am solid. Right. And so I have now shifted to a model of I'm going to record things and everything is going to be pre recorded so I can do it when I need to do it, when it's good. And then it's up there and I won't have live stuff anymore. And instead, I'm just kind of doing like a Q&A. If people subscribe on my Instagram, it's just like $5 a month Q&A, pop in, ask me questions about the course details, whatever. But things are always going to be self-paced and up. So people, I'm maybe recording a little bit more extensively and like kind of answering some questions I might anticipate within things.
Mm-hmm.
But that more information and work on the front end for me is worth it to not be unable to show up how I know that I can and my clients deserve on the other end. So that's just one of the systems in my business that I put in place. But I also have all kinds of other things to know that like those days happen. And on those days, how are we going to communicate to people? Are we going to communicate to people? Do we, another thing on like social media, if there's so many people in here who are like entrepreneurs and sharing their journeys, like, do you have just posts that you can just repost or put up on those harder weeks or whatever, or, those seasons where you're not feeling motivated, or, like there's always ability to, it may not be the thing that you wanted,
Right.
but can we adapt and be okay with it not being perfect or exactly as planned? Because it's not always going to go as planned.
It's
And
almost never going to go as planned.
right. So the backup plans, like I have B-roll content of just like backgrounds and quotes that I can add whenever I want, right? That are like, it's like, I can't show up today, but here, there's still some stuff for you, right? Because I know like I lead a community and that kind of thing, but also like people recognize that like I'm not expected to show up all day every day. I recognize that too. But even so, if there's like periods where it's like, I just don't have the ability to be as creative right now, or I don't have this or whatever, and adapting. And obviously that's social media, but I share that because I know there are a lot of people here who run social media accounts who are
Mhm.
listening to these things. And just like have little backup plans in place. Like, hey, for a low energy day or a harder emotion day, or, whatever, if this circumstance comes up or I have to step away for whatever, systems in place are really helpful.
Yeah, I kind of have this sort of kind of list of like low energy, like all things that need to happen. And they're not all high, they're clearly not all high priority because some of them don't ever need to happen. But if I'm just having one of those days where I need something to, I can look and I can feel like I've done something. Um, but the other thing I've recognized, at least for myself, is when I have those like super productive days, like I need to reserve a little bit of energy at the end of that day to
Yeah.
rework my week because the end of that week is not going to be productive. Like I might have two good super productive days, but then the rest is not going to be productive at all. So I need to like figure that out. And so
Yeah.
some of it is really just like learning those patterns that and not everything is going to have a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
If you get triggered out of the blue, I mean, who can expect that? But
Yeah.
there's always not always, because I just said there aren't always, but if you can discover a pattern and have things in place for that too, you can see when it's happening and you're like, okay, this is
Mm-hmm.
I'm heading for a crash, or or you're kind of at the end of the crash, you're like, oh, next week I could tell I'm going to be super productive because I've been a slug for the past 4 days. What
Mm-hmm.
can I get done? Um, yeah, is and it's frustrating because like if you're not neurodiverse, you don't like these are not conversations that you have to have with yourself. You're just like, oh, well, I need to clean the bathroom today. So I'm just going to clean the bathroom. I don't want to clean the bathroom, but I want the bathroom to be clean.
Yep.
Whereas I'm like, yeah, I want the bathroom to be clean, but I cannot make myself do it. Like it's just not happening.
Yep. And the level of steps that this takes and the level of planning and the
Right.
level of like, my brain just isn't doing it today. And like how,
Yeah.
and the accommodations of like, how can I break this down? And if I can, and, like maybe things like body doubling when it's like actually things like that. But also, yeah, I agree. It's just like, we are, if you are neurodivergent, you're expert at pattern recognition. So use
Hmm.
that to your benefit and
Right.
recognize it in your own function, right?
Right.
I noticed this sign. This means this, right? I know if I record too much video one day or the other day, I'm going to be exhausted the rest of the week.
Yeah.
Even if it was fun, I was energized the whole time. I'm going to be like in 2 days of a complete shutdown. And that's just what happens. Is it frustrating? Yeah, but I have to recognize that's just my pattern, right? And so now I know moving forward when I make my own schedule, oh, I need to accommodate for this, right? Or if you
Right.
were doing more than you expected to, and you're starting to shut down, or you realize you're going to get more energy, really being able to be flexible without judging yourself for that, right? And I
Right.
think that's a huge thing of even multi-passionate or neurodivergent or anything, is like the ability to be flexible, especially as you're getting out of the corporate world. If that's something that you're into, then can be extra helpful, because that's part of the reason that a lot of us leave is there's not much
Right.
flexibility, right?
Yeah, at the same time, you've got to be careful not to be like too flexible with yourself, where you're
Right.
like where you don't get anything done,
Yep.
because that's often it's not it's more of a an avoidance or a fear of getting started. But it's very easy to be like, oh, I'm just having a hard brain day, and I'm going to focus on this another time.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, you learn so much going out on your own, and I mean, I'm certainly pulling stuff that I learned, throughout my career, but you really do face like what you're good at, what you're not good at, trying to figure out how to make it work, how to wear all the hats and
Yeah.
when to pass off a hat. And but then, I mean, and that's great too, because you can outsource at some point, but then
Hmm.
you've got to manage that relationship. And that's just more stuff. But again, you as the person who runs your business get to choose who you work with. And so you get to choose people who, again, are going to fit your work style um and are going to care about what they do. And
Hmm.
so it's yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just I love working with small business owners um because they really care about what they're doing. Not
Yeah.
that people in their regular jobs don't care about what they're doing, but it's just um I don't know, just
You're the one who created it. It's a
right,
different kind of passion.
right.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, I think too that when you're thinking about this is my passion, this is what I want to do, it's important to consider also that we do have the ability to put in systems. We do care so much. And sometimes caring so much, we can still over obsess over certain
Uh,
details, right?
oh, exactly.
Like, very, like, this is my baby. I don't want to pass this off, but could I?
Yeah,
Yes, right. And just recognizing that, like, like you said, you're faced with these things about yourself that you're gonna have to look at. But it doesn't always have to be bad, and it doesn't
right.
always have to be that hard as you put systems in place and have that flexibility for
Right.
sure.
And I think that then also just, I mean, again, it's learning to be compassionate with yourself, um which then just trickles out into so many other things because I was always like I said, less hard on anybody else, but just having to learn that lesson, to be more compassionate for myself, it's just increased my ability to, even when I'm having a bad day and I'm feeling crabby, and I might have been less generous with my compassion in the past, I'm still like, you know what, it's okay. Like I could be having a terrible day and something awful could happen. And I'm like, you know what, we all have days. So it's helped me, um, not just to become more compassionate for myself, but to be able to extend additional compassion to other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the more, and I would say too, like, when people, I would say most of us extend more compassion to others,
Yeah.
right? So if that's hard for you to do that for yourself, start modeling, like, or like mirroring what you would do for someone else. I
Hmm.
always say, like, the reason I stepped into my self-love journey because I started treating myself like someone I loved before I did. And so it kind of just got to this point of like, if my friend was feeling this way, what would I do?
Hmm.
If they were having this hard time, what would I do? Right. And then going through the motions sometimes, right? Like, even before we fully believe or feel like don't have as like still have the shame with this or whatever, it's like really like being like, okay, what would I do if?
Right.
And I think that kind of helps others as well. And I know for me, that's literally how I was able to actually start loving myself. Fake it till you make it
Yeah.
and get more of that compassion and things. And so, like, on these harder days, I can be like, hey, I'm gonna be real honest, and I'm not feeling like, because like the main thing for me, I think, was like I felt like less of a professional or less of like a human when I wasn't able to perform to certain standards. And I think that, like, I'm going to be seen as incompetent or my
Hmm.
reputation is going to be ruined, right? And I can imagine that even regardless of circumstances, if you have to do something different than the norm, it's a huge fear for a lot of
Oh,
people.
yeah, definitely. Um, well,
Huge.
and especially if you're coming from a place where like, um, everybody did just conform, and you're like, well, I want to, I need to do things differently, and how are people going to respond to that? I mean, that's definitely um, a fear, because like clearly like this is the right way to do it because all of these companies are so big and they all do it this way and that must be the only way.
Yeah.
But like I like to you know I, I think about like because for a while everybody was like, oh, the big bookstores, they're going to take over and there's not going to be any more local bookstores. Well, where I live, there's tons of little local bookstores because people love them. And so like there's always going to be, yes, that more or that more efficient big box place is always going to be there, and there's people who want that, but there are going to be other people who want the, maybe it's a little less efficient but it's more personal, maybe it's it's harder to get, to, but like there's value in that to people who care about that kind of stuff. It's the same like people who go to microbreweries rather than picking up a six pack of whatever at the grocery store. Like
Yeah.
those specialty experiences and those things that you have that nobody else does or nobody else can do quite like you,
Mm-hmm.
it's valuable. And I think we often downplay that in our, well, not, I've seen it a lot. We do downplay that in ourselves because
Yeah.
we think it's like we have to be this big thing to make a difference, and you don't. Like
Mm-hmm.
um oh gosh, there's this lake, I think it's Lake Powder. I don't, I should know this, but it's the beginning of the Colorado River, and it's just like this placid little lake. But like you look at what the Colorado River has done, and it all originated from this lake, and it's made the Grand Canyon. Like, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like it happened overnight. It wasn't. It was like drop by drop. Like little things have a big impact. So you don't have to make the Grand Canyon. You can just be part of the flow that helps change the world. And I think we downplay those things because of all the things that we've absorbed as people, going through our lives and trying to fit into these molds, and especially if you've masked and
Mm-hmm.
are having to and are wanting to unmask and feel very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
That question just hangs there, like, you know what's going to happen when I take this off, and will people care, or will I,
Absolutely.
will I
And
make it?
completely. And so it's really, I love that analogy with the river. And it just, I think another strategy within that is just when you're having the hard things, remind yourself what you have done.
Mhm.
Remind yourself who you are, right? I always say, like, when I'm in like a negative self-shame spiral, the number one thing that I need is someone who knows me to positively, aggressively remind me who the hell I am,
Mhm.
remind me what I've done, remind me what I'm capable of, and like I'm allowed to be human, right?
Right.
And like sometimes that reframing can be so positive in your mind, and that maybe some of the harder things or the struggles don't feel so intense when we can look at that, right? Like the
Right.
standards for ourselves, we kind of get a reality check in a really positive way.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like the even if you can't call up your best friend, just the, what would they say to me right now? And you
Mm-hmm.
can hear their voice in your head, and you're like, yeah, they're right. Because they're saying the exact same thing that you would say to them if you were,
Yep.
saying all those negative things. But yeah, reframing it is hard. And then again, like what's great about that analogy with the lake is that even a small drop eventually makes a difference. So if all you can do today is the smallest thing,
Yep.
you're still doing it. Like it doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
flood. It can be a tiny little drop. And that could be it for the day.
Yep.
Some days it doesn't really rain at all. It's
Yep.
okay.
Yep. I love that. Ah, fluctuating lives of nature. It's like if
Yes.
nature can fluctuate and have seasons so much, why do we as humans think that we can't?
Oh, because we think we can control all of that.
We control the world. Yeah, no. No, wait, that is control is also another misconception. We don't really have as much control as we think we do. We can
Oh,
control what we
but I
can
like to,
control, but
yes. Oh, I know, but I
not
like to
everything.
pretend I can control far more than I can control.
Oh, too. I'm like, I'm gonna control the way the world plays out right now. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. Yeah. Especially when it comes to my life path. I'm like, there's this, then this, then this, then this, and then something happens, and I'm like, that's not my plan. And then I get mad and like throw a
Mhm.
tantrum. It's like, did you really have that control? I remember when I was younger, I was like, okay, so I am going to go to college and I'm going to meet the man of my dreams. I'm going to get married by 23. I'm going to have kids by 26. And by 30, I will be traveling the world. I'm 30. I am single. And there is nothing on the horizon at this moment. And like, and you know, the world around me is like, oh, we can like compare and whatever. But like, honestly, I'm very glad that that didn't happen because if I was currently with the man that I was interested in when I started college, I'd be living a whole different life and it would not be a healthy one. So, you know, it's like we have to remember too that like sometimes plans don't work out because there's another plan that's maybe a little bit better and more suited for us too. Um, and being flexible with that and that you know I've definitely seen coincidences like oh I was supposed to go on this trip or whatever or you know there was something for me where um I was supposed to be going to Boston. I would have been living right next to where the Boston bombing was like months after. And I'm sure I would have been like, my dorm was literally right around that finish line. So who knows? Who
Mhm.
genuinely knows? Right. But I was just like, this is so horrible. And, blah, 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 and like, maybe something happened and that was for a reason. I know it's a personal belief of mine too, but also, you know, it's like it helps me for sure when it's like, well, I can't control everything, but maybe there's a reason that I can't control everything and I just have to like trust and surrender and allow that know that like this is actually for my good and I can make the most out of wherever I am now.
Right. Well, and also you make these plans with the best information that you have at the time that you're making them, but that's not all the information that's out there. And
Mm,
so, there's, so you're making this plan because that's what you want your life to be, but you don't really know, especially when you're like 23 and you're like, yes, I planned my whole life out. Well, you're going to change a lot in the next couple of years. So how do you know? And
yeah.
and that's true throughout your whole life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
as you hone what's really important to you. I mean, I think as you get a little bit older and you refine those things, um, maybe it doesn't shift quite as much, but it's always changing. Like
Yeah.
because because everything changes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you know, just like, what is the cheesy saying? Change is the only constant.
Yeah. Well, and so that's one of the
Uh,
things that I like to share because I kind of got stuck in that mindset too of like I have to know everything about what I'm going to do with my business before I can start it. Like
mm-hmm.
like the guy who created IBM knew what that was going to be when he started it. No, I mean he had an idea, whatever. I don't know. I actually don't know the story of the guy who I assume it was a guy who created IBM. Like maybe he did know that it was going to be an international conglomeration, but I suspect not. And
Yep.
so, but we seem to think we have to have everything all mapped out, and then it's like carved in stone, and nothing can change. And you can change anything at any
Mm-hmm.
time. If it's not working for you, change it. Like that's the beauty of having, the autonomy, and that's true even in your career. I know that's um, it's harder to find another job. It's hard to change, and in some circumstances, people might not be able to move as easily.
Yep.
But I mean, you can make changes. They might be painful. I mean, change often is,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing has to stay the way that it is. Um,
Yeah. Well, I
you
think
know,
also in change, it's allowing priorities to shift and maybe recognizing that it may be different than someone else's priorities, right?
yes.
So, one of the things for me is like one of my biggest values while I was building a business, like I said, you know, I went to like the hyperfixation and burnout and whatever. One of the biggest values that I needed in my business is flexibility. And I have put that and prioritize that above consistent financial income and making what I could make, right? Like I could work part time as an occupational therapist and be making some significant stable money and be just fine, right? But also I lose my mental health. I get so overwhelmed and so tired that I still can't keep up on my business in the way that I want
Hmm.
to, right? And so recognizing that, okay, if this is my priority, making this passion project, purpose, everything for me sustainable, and also, you know, supporting people and even doing that little bits at a time And now after I have the foundations now, like the next thing is like expansion. So how do I put that in place? And for me, I nanny part-time because one, I love kids. Two, it's enough to pay the bills. Like we're barely paying bills, but we're paying bills, right?
Hmm.
And so I am prioritizing the ability to be more flexible. And if things come up or whatever it is, or if I get this big opportunity, it's a lot easier to leave than if I have a list of medical clients with all of these things and they don't have replacements or whatever. And so it's just a little bit more flexible, and I can I move stuff around or whatever. And so that's been my priority. And so I've had people look at me and be like, why do you do this to yourself? Like, why can't but it's like my brain doesn't do all the things, so I need to
Hmm.
prioritize all the things. And for me, if I don't have my mental health and I don't have my energy, I don't have any other foundations in my life. And so that's been something I've had to prioritize. And I've been lucky and fortunate enough to that I have been able to, and that, like I have been able to do what I need to do. And, it has allowed me to be able to go deeper in my healing and do things now. And like I'm in a position now where I finally am ready to like expand in my business and make more things and you support people in different ways to where I can get some more, financial support coming in within my business. But I was in a chapter for a while where I wasn't able to do that. And so I needed the flexibility to work through that and make the baby steps, right? Because, like,
Hmm.
one of my favorite things, I actually have a thing right next to me that says big things and small steps. That's my like motto right now and what I'm keeping in my head, because there are big visions, but small steps need to happen to make that happen, right? And because you're not going to change the world, you're not going to build the Grand Canyon
Right.
that quickly. And, being okay to prioritize, okay, what do I need to do? If this is my goal,
Right.
what are my actual priorities and what can I compromise a little bit on? And
Right.
be honest with yourself. And not everyone's going to accept it, but you have to do what's right for you.
Right. Yeah. And the same with your what success means for you, because
Mm,
it's not the same for everybody else.
hmm
Some people are, I remember I was working for this uh, one of the companies I worked with, and it was a small business, but and we hired out other consultants, and one of the consultants, lovely, and has just a small business and isn't looking to grow it into anything phenomenal, or like not phenomenal, but like big, and like he's not
Yeah.
looking to expand and scale and all of the things.
hmm
And the person that I was working for was very much looking to do that with his business, and kind of like looked at this other one, was like, well, he just wants a lifestyle business, like one that maintains his lifestyle. And you know, I'm like, "Oh, what's wrong with that? Like, that's
hmm
not your priority, but if he's happy, why do you care? Like,
Yep.
that's his success, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to, like, if success for you is having enough. I have a friend, she lives off grid most of the time if she can help it. Like, but she likes to travel and she can work remotely. She's got like this whole setup, but she wants enough that she can live the life she wants to live. And that doesn't
hmm
that's that's cool. Like, yay. That and surely some people look and are like, well, that's weird. I wouldn't want to do that. Well, then don't do it. You don't have to do it.
It's not yours. Yeah. That's
Right.
the great thing about, I mean, especially entrepreneurship is like you can design the life that you want and, have the values in your life and create the life that you want around that, right? There are some people who work in seasons. There are some people who, have things automated. There are some people who like, no, I need to be on, maybe I give myself a 9 to 5, whatever it is for
Right.
you. It's like you set what matters to you. And I love that as like you define your success and your own version of success. And yeah, I mean, that's going to be different for every single person.
Right. And then
And
you get
that's
to figure
okay.
out how to prioritize what you need to get to that success. Like, there isn't you
hmm
know, I think that could be frustrating if you're going to like a coach or something and you're like, well, how do I do this? And you're like, well, it depends on who you are. Like, what's going to work for you? What worked for me isn't going to work for you. I can share my experiences and I can help you talk through yours. And like, but nobody has the same experience doing anything.
Mm-mm.
There's lessons that you can learn, but there isn't a magic formula that's going to work for everybody all the
No.
time. Like, you've got to and that's one of the things, is that you have to be willing to look in, and again, this is like discovering yourself. um looking to know like what you need support with and what you don't, and what you can knock out of the park and what is going to be a struggle like every live long day, and
Yeah.
make choices accordingly.
Yeah. And I love that you're like, it's gonna be different, right?
Hmm.
Everyone's gonna be different. It reminds me about what I say about healing all the time is like when we're talking about anything in life is like when it comes to trauma or neurodivergence or anything, it's like you are as unique as your trauma is one of the things that I say all the time. And so therefore, like that can apply to anything, right? It's like everything in our lives is so context dependent that there is no one who's going to have the same subjective experience, beliefs, everything. Even if someone was in almost the exact same situation, they don't have your background, they don't have your experience, they don't have all of these stuff, right? They don't have whatever values or beliefs that are exactly the same. Like we are going to be individual humans, and therefore our journeys are going to be more listening to internally
Hmm.
what feels good. And that's really like the finding the alignment with yourself and your true self, and listening to that and letting that lead. And that's one of the biggest skills, like self-discovery, like you said. And then recognizing that maybe that is a corporate job, maybe it's something different.
Right.
And but you have to be able to allow yourself to be an individual and not just be a robot who's following what the world says. And I know that can be hard because
Yes.
the world doesn't like individuals,
Hmm.
but
Yes.
forget
And the
the
world is
world.
big, and they have a lot of opinions. Um,
Truly,
yeah, but
truly.
at the same time, I mean, not to like scare any listeners into like there are no answers, but like there are
Truly.
frameworks. I mean, there are, um, it's not like everybody has to reinvent the wheel,
Yeah.
but so yeah, there are frameworks, but it's just that there's so many possibilities that it's not going to be a you know, I read this book and now I know how to do it. Like it's not. You're gonna have to figure like things, and it's trial and error. Some of it instinctively. You look at that and you're like, there is no way that's gonna work for me. Um, but there were things like that I didn't trust myself enough, and I'm like, oh well, this is what it says we need to do, so I should do it this way. And
Mm-hmm.
then I try it and it was miserable, and be like, I knew that wasn't going to work for me. Why did I try that?
Yep.
And it's okay that that didn't work for me, and it's great that it works for other people. But it's okay to try things and leave them. It's okay to just ignore things that aren't going to work for you, even if everybody says you need to do it.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, like taxes, you should pay your taxes. Like that's like you should just ignore those. But like
Yeah.
almost everything else, like if there's not a law, it's probably pretty flexible and you can do what works for you. Um, and that's I think that's the thing that is very freeing, but can also be very scary
I agree.
because you're like, but who's going to tell me what to do and give me all the rules to follow? Um, but that's not why you're doing what you're doing.
No, and that's the thing is like if it's hard for you to get to that point by yourself, then that's when you reach out to someone like you.
Hmm.
So I think that's a good segue to kind of wrap up the conversation for now. And for those people who are looking for that support and people to help them figure out or the resources, can you share a little bit about where people can connect with you, some more things you offer?
Sure. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. Everything is at Weirdly Wired Women. I have my website, and then at if you there's a couple places you can find it on Weirdly Wired Women, but my kind of intro to thinking about things differently as far as your work goes is called Break Free and Bloom, and it's kind of a high level master plan towards thinking about what you really want out of your job, and how to make your livelihood fit your life. And so that's at weirdlywiredwomen.com/welcome, or there's a couple of other places on the site that you can sign up for that. And I am also going to be starting a podcast soon.
Love that.
August 15th. I'm going to put it out there, or say it so that I actually have to do it.
Love that.
Um, but just kind of talking about, some will be solo episodes, some will have guests, just kind of talking about being neurodivergent and in business, and being female, trying to juggle all of the things that we have to juggle, and what all those things mean in general. I mean, because there's so much overlap between like what's my personality, what's my ADHD, and what is growing up in the patriarchy. And um,
Truly.
yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
That's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, so that's where I am.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I am looking forward to that podcast. It is definitely something that is right up my alley. And I'm glad it's so funny. There's this theme, people come on here and then they start their own podcast. So I love that this keeps happening with my guests. I think there's like 5 or 6 of y'all at this point. I love it. Everyone needs a podcast, everyone.
Yes.
Thank
Well,
you so
I mean,
much.
especially if you get to talk to really cool people, like some of it I'll just be rambling by myself, but like conversations like this, they're just, it's again, it's part of that like not being alone. Like you are not the
Mm-mm.
only person struggling with the thing that you think you're struggling with. Like, um, you know, yeah, there's so many things that I kept quiet in my head because I was like, oh, clearly I'm the like the idiot in the room. And then I learned about my diagnosis, and then I started talking to people, and I'm like, no, no, that wasn't like if only I had known and felt comfortable talking with someone, like how much quicker could I've made these leaps and discoveries about myself.
Yep. And it's very much in alignment with what we do here too. Like literally it's you felt silenced or weren't able to tell someone or felt alone. And this literally this whole space exists to say that like you're not alone, you're valid. Here's some understanding as to what this is, and here's some supports and connections and whatever it is. So I'm just so grateful for people like you and conversations like this. Like, because podcasting is my absolute favorite thing. And it's because we get to have conversations like this and just be real, open, honest, vulnerable, and remind people that they really are not alone. And regardless of however weirdly wired you think you are, there is a space for you and there are ways to create it. So I do
Well,
hope that
exactly.
people connect.
And that people have different perspectives, but like there's so many people out again, because it can feel lonely. There's so many people out there in your corner who want to see you succeed.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to find those people.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure that you go connect with her because she's one of those people. Definitely one of those people.
Well, thank you. You are one
All
of
right.
those people as well.
Oh, well,
A
thank
little
you.
love fest.
Little love fest at the end. Oh, we're going to take that love and wrap it up. Thank you so much for being here again. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope that however you're moving forward today, have whatever day feels right for you. And know that in whatever journey and whatever thing you're overcoming, we're here for support. Have a
Thanks
good
so
day,
much for
everyone.
having me.
Of course. Bye.